For decades, British politics operated on a reassuring assumption. Whatever governments did or didn't do, the two great political machines of the age, Labour and Conservative, would continue to grind forward, absorbing shocks, changing leaders, debating policy, but ultimately preserving stability. And the post-war settlement was not simply economic or constitutional, it was cultural. It offered continuity. Andrew Marr, perhaps the most experienced political journalist of his generation, has now expressed what many have been whispering for months, that that settlement has collapsed, not gently, not slowly, it is falling apart in plain sight. Marr's criticism of Keir Starmer is not personal malice, it's disappointment. When the public swept Labour into office, there was relief and even hope after the clownish self-indulgence of the Johnson years, after the trusts, the chaos, the absolute chaos and the dithering of the dithering of Mrs May and the chaos of Truss, after the sagging inertia of Sunak, a man who promised so much and in the end offered so little because he relied on people like Priti Patel. The country longed for seriousness. They believed that competence, decency, managerial focus could restore public faith, and that belief has evaporated. Labour has been dragged into the same death spiral that was already consuming the Conservatives. Polling at 15% is not merely bad news, it is existential. Starmer has managed to make the electoral group, the electorate, furious and bored simultaneously, a rare and unenviable political achievement. Why? Marr identifies several fundamental failures. First, competence without delivery is indistinguishable from incompetence. Clean energy investment, new towns, breakfast clubs, a tariff deal with Trump, support for Ukraine, all admirable. But the lived experience of Britain is that nothing works. The trains fail, the sewage pours, the NHS is exhausted, housing remains a fantasy, crime feels unpunished. And these wounds predate Labour, but the government underestimated how rapidly their patience would be tested. To voters, the managerial promise feels like managerial futility. Second, Labour misjudged the fury building beneath the surface. Where Starmer offers polite caution, the country demands force and passion. Marr puts it cleanly. These are days for eloquence, fire and argument, yet Starmer remains technocratic, risk-averse and a public-spirited Puritan governing a nation that has lost its faith in Puritanism. He isn't that different, really, from what Sunak offered. Third, the centre ground is no longer the safe ground, and in fact I would say that Sunak probably was better. The Conservatives abandoned that centre ground long ago, years ago. Now reform is mining the despair of formerly Labour communities. And a year ago it would have been unthinkable that voters in the Welsh valleys, in inner London, in the mill towns of the north would even consider Nigel Farage as a future Prime Minister. Today it's a real possibility, partly because reform fills the gap of none of the above. Reform no longer looks like a protest, it looks like a momentum, but it is a protest vote. It is quite extraordinary. It has moved from protest to from a negative to an existence, from a negative existence as a protest to existence as reform, because it fills that gap, because it is there. And Labour's left flank is also collapsing. Marr points to the extraordinary finding that the Greens have, in at least one poll, edged ahead of Labour. Corbyn's lowest point was still 23%. Starmer's Labour has travelled far below that line. We are watching a party being torn apart in all directions. Inside Labour, the panic has begun. Leadership gossip is already circulating. Could Streeting, newly aggressive and rhetorically sharper, become the new standard bearer? Could Miliband be resurrected by history? Could Rayner or Burnham promise emotional connection where Starmer offers sober caution? Could Rachel Reeves be sacrificed after a budget backlash, only to be installed at the Foreign Office to protect her from becoming a threat? We're speculating about a crisis that is not yet fully broken. That alone tells us the scale of the danger. Marr's broader thesis is grim but persuasive. The two-party model no longer maps onto the social reality of Britain. Economic stagnation, collapsing public confidence, unmanaged immigration, crime and disorder, regional inequality, institutional incompetence. These have created a political ecosystem that rejects moderation. The politics of disgust has replaced the politics of loyalty. And we're swapping a politics of patient reform for a politics of punishment. It's not just Starmer's leadership that is in question, it's the very idea of a Labour establishment. Populism animated the right first, but despair has no ideological loyalty. It will devour Labour too. Marr's most powerful warning is also his simplest. The assumption that voters will automatically reject Farage is grossly complacent. Reform has already tempered its wildest fantasies, dropped its absurd tax promises, and begun courting the British state's elite. Its danger lies not in its extremism, but in its adaptability. And what of the Conservatives? Marr writes as if their extinction has already occurred, and I think he's probably right in that sort of a proleptic approach. Once the political expression of business, the armed forces, the Church of England and rural England, they are now scattered and directionless, a party characterised by wealth but incapable of governing, clinging to memories rather than offering futures. And Badenoch's tenure simply amplifies that problem. Thus Marr's lament, the post-war order appears spent. If Starmer falls, Labour will shift left. If that fails, the centre will shatter entirely. If reform rises, Britain will enter uncharted territory, and we may learn too late that our years of turmoil were calm by comparison to what comes next. Of course, there is every possibility and every probability that the Lib Dems will move in to take the centre ground and will replace the Conservatives completely and have time to demonstrate their competence in opposition. Andrew Marr has not given up on the possibility of redemption. Politics, he reminds us, is emotional, unpredictable, but his confession is stark. He once saw Starmer as a grown-up who would restore trust. He now sees him as the caretaker of decline. The question he leaves hanging is simple, unsettling and unanswered. If not Starmer, then who? If not Labour, then what? We stand in the closing act of a political age. The next act has not yet been written, but the audience is restless and the stage is already shaking. And if we can tolerate Badenoch, if we think Badenoch is the answer, there may be a majority growing that think, well, why not give Farage a chance? We have seen how Badenoch destroyed the Conservative Party. Let's see how Farage can destroy the country.